Hello everybody and welcome to another installment of the Radiator Arms, best viewed in 16-bit colour. Now today, some of you that are watching may notice we are down a man. Ant is not here, meaning it's just myself, James, aka JM on Cars, and
Will the Plank.
the mighty Will. And we figured, even though we are a man down, and don't worry, he's just out of action temporarily with man flu, deadliest of all the flus, but he wanted us to go on without him, and so we of course decided that we would, even before he told us to. Now we're going to take advantage of the fact that he's not here to rein us in and give us sensible ideas, and instead we're going to spend this entire episode, sort of, talking about the joy of cheap cars. Because, you know what, there is, I think, almost nothing better than a dirt cheap car. And the cheaper, the better sometimes. But I figured, to give it a little bit of perspective and to spice it up a bit, we'll talk about cheap cars and the other end of things. I'll talk about how I've experienced both the cheap cars and the expensive stuff and the many, many reasons why I do believe that cheap cars are the best, and some of the reasons why I still enjoy the slightly spicier stuff. Now, to begin, what have you done in your motoring world over the last week? Achieved anything?
Well, I did find out there was a pound coin size hole in the sill of my car, which I need to now get sorted.
Oh, in the Golf?
In the Golf.
Oh, dear.
Yeah, well, I'm not surprised because it's been patched up into oblivion and it's now time for a full new sill. And it's not too expensive to actually buy the sill, but I believe there could be a little bit of cost in the labour. That's the only thing. And this is a car I already have far too much money into, but I'm far too deep to stop now.
That, I fear, is going to be a recurring theme with this episode. And I think we've all got cars where we look back on it and think, I should have stopped a long, long time before I actually did. I mean, I had it with my MG ZS, the second one that I owned, the blue facelift car. I got that for the princely sum of 425 quid. And it looked okay. It is a bit battered on one side of it, but I had quite a good service history with it and everything, few miles on it. And the guy sold it to me because he knew that I would, do right by the car. Unfortunately, when I had it looked at, we found out that, yeah, there was corrosion under it. There were quite a few issues. And by the time you actually draw up a list of what you need to do to make the car a good one, it's way beyond what it's ever going to be worth. And I don't mind spending more on a car than it's worth, but you do have to draw the line somewhere.
I've never learnt that.
Yeah, I mean, I only have in recent times. I mean, you're a couple of years younger than me, so maybe it'll sort of take hold when you hit sort of 34, But yeah, with that MG, I sort of drew the line with that one, partly because I'd also bought the ZR, and I knew that the ZR was going to be a pretty major product, and it turned out to be a really major project, and that's still an ongoing one. But I'm very happy. I'm actually in that sort of position now where I can afford to buy a car and chuck at it an amount of money that I know I'm never going to see back. But it does have to be the right car.
Yeah, the ZR, that's the yellow, the
Yeah.
yellow one that you've got, because you did an update recently of that, and like the underside of that looks so clean, you could eat your dinner off it.
Oh yeah, no, I've definitely got filthier dinner plates.
Yeah,
for sure.
I know, I've been around your house, I've seen them.
Thank you very much. There are a few cars I think that I would do that for, but I believe, and this is a really important thing for this topic, there are a lot of cars out there that I think simply because of the audience that they appeal to and the sort of people that bought them, even though they were fairly commonplace at one point in time, attrition rates are pretty high. In the first few years, they get crashed, damaged, whatever. Then they kind of get to the point where they're not really worth that much money. For MG Rover products in particular, it was really extreme because, of course, the company folded in 2006. So you could have had a car that you maybe bought in 2004, 2005. The blue ZS was a 55 plate. Someone bought that new, and a year later, the company folded. They were gone, so the warranty wasn't worth anything, and the car was worth effectively nothing. I spoke to a company once. They had a lovely MG ZT, so the Rover 75 equivalent. And it was in one of their amazing flip paints, kind of TVR style, one of the monogram paints. So it was like a bit like the green and purple paint.
Yeah, I know the one. They look very nice.
Yeah, they look spectacular. And I actually thought, because the guys who owned it were a paint shop that specialised in TVRs, that they'd sprayed the car in a TVR colour for a bit of practice or fun or whatever. And they said, no, this was the factory colour. We bought it brand spanking new in 2006. How much do you think we paid for it? And it was like a diesel saloon or whatever, so not remarkable, but a lovely thing. They paid $8,000 for it.
Wow.
Yeah.
Wow, for a brand new car.
Yeah, brand spanking new, because it was going to come with no warranty. And at the time, I think people were unaware of whether spare parts was going to be an issue or anything else. And who wants to buy a brand new car from a company that's just gone out of business and is, not going to support it, especially with the reputation that MG Rover already had? I mean, you'd buy an import Toyota or Honda, wouldn't you? Because you're going to be, fairly satisfied that it's going to be reliable. An MG Rover, I don't know about you. I haven't seen the Americans queuing up to import ZRs and ZSs now they're 25 years old or getting close to it.
No, I don't think they have, but I don't know. I don't know if the Americans, though, have had the exposure to the MG Rover side of things, as a lot of them probably don't even know they exist.
No, I expect that they don't. It's one of the things I find fascinating when you go to the States. There are so many normal, ordinary, everyday cars over there that they get and we don't, and vice versa. And whenever I go to the States, people always think that I'm going to be interested in like Mustangs, Corvettes, Vipers, that sort of stuff. But we get those here. People will import the interesting stuff. They look at me strangely because, there's a lovely, Corvette parked up. And instead, I'm absolutely mesmerized by a Pontiac Aztek.
Yeah.
Or, or a Dodge Caravelle or something utterly and totally bizarre.
I'm absolutely the same as you. I watch like a lot of American YouTubers. There's probably a lot of people over here do. A lot of automotive ones specifically. And it's all of them mucking around with these old American cars. That's how I got my love for Crown Vics. Wasn't through like the films and all the kind of like the picturesque pictures of New York and all the taxis going by. No, it was just idiots on YouTube, like blowing them up and doing silly things and thinking, that's well cool. I'd like one of those for that purpose.
Yeah, I got to drive a Crown Vic Police Interceptor on the channel, and I have to say it was terrifying because the visibility in it was atrocious. This one had been converted to dog spec, so it's already a big car, you're already on the wrong side of it, and you had zero rear visibility. It was pretty sketchy at a few of the turnings that we have around here.
Now, it's interesting. The meet I helped you put on recently, Mr. Furious Driving, he came down with his police Crown Vic. And while it was huge, I think I've realised just how big cars have become in general, because I didn't think it was actually that big compared to some of the stuff I've seen on UK roads that we get domestically anyway. I don't know how you feel about that.
So I tell you what it is, from experience, the Crown Vic, it's not particularly broad. It's still under 2 meters wide. So it's big, but it's not huge. But it's long. I think it's about 5.3 meters long, which for reference is kind of S-Class or 7 Series long wheelbase length. Like it's a little bit shorter than, say, like a Rolls-Royce Ghost or something like that. But it's a big car. What it doesn't have, though, because it's a sedan, is volume. So I think you park it next to a Range Rover, and the Range Rover will just look bigger, even though it's actually a shorter car. Like a full-fat Range Rover is about 2/3 of a foot shorter than that Crown Vic. You just don't notice it. When I first got my S-Class long wheelbase, I actually found I had to park it in car parks where you could back up to another car, because that was the only way I could make sure I was in the space properly. There was so much car behind me. I'd park it where I thought felt about right, and I'd get out and I'd put the car about 2 feet into the space behind me. So I was always parking against other cars. It had no reversing camera or anything. It had sensors.
What year was it?
That was a 1999, I think. Yeah, V-Reg.
Yeah.
It was a lovely car. And it's one of these cars where actually I probably should have kept it, because I bought it for like less than $3,000. I sold it for less than $2,000. I sold it for about 1,800 quid.
How long ago was this?
So I sold it in the, I think, middle of 2020.
Okay.
When, of course, cars were just worth nothing. I needed some money. it had to go, and I bought something else instead, which kind of replaced it, my 7 Series, which wound up being a far more problematic car. But it was a marvelously luxurious thing. It is ULEZ compliant, and so for vehicles to get you into central London in comfort, you really would struggle to do any better than that. The problem is, I then don't want to park it in central London.
Yeah, is it just a size thing, or is it because you think people are going to like abuse it, damage it?
No, because I think to just the average passerby, it's just a big BMW, and it's a '07 plated car. That actually had a really interesting history, because though it was an '07 car, I don't think it was first registered until 2009.
Interesting.
Yeah, now it's a 760 Li, so it's the daddy. It's the top spec engine, 6-litre V12. It was a lovely sort of dark blue. I think it was Monaco blue with like a beige interior. It was a really lovely colour combo. Had all the toys and everything.
Do you remember the registration for it?
Yeah, LF07 HFB.
HFB.
Yeah.
So, because I've got an app I use, which isn't sponsored or affiliated or anything like that, called Vehicle Smart. And that's quite handy because it will tell you when a vehicle is first registered and registered with the DVLA.
Yeah.
So, this BMW 760 was first registered on the 1st of June 2007, but it was first registered with the DVLA on February 2011.
Yeah. So, I think what happened there is, bear in mind, it's top of the line, really well specified car, and it came out in 2007. 2007 was not a great time to try and sell a really, really thirsty executive luxury car.
No.
Really bad. I think in the entire run of that generation of 7 Series, they only sold in Britain something like 200 of the 760s. That was it. Yeah, like 99% of them. Because when they started it, I don't think they did a diesel. But as soon as they did, that was the only one that everybody wanted to buy. The 760 is just basically a bit of, waving. And that's what it's for. And it's to satisfy the people that have to have the absolute best. But I loved it. And also, by the time I bought it, diesel was very much out of fashion. And also, it was my first V12, which was something I always wanted to have. But that car, I think, when it came out, nobody was really interested in buying it. Once the financial crisis had really bitten hard, I think definitely nobody was interested in buying it. And then, to make matters even worse, the car got replaced, I think about a year later. So then some poor dealer was stuck with last year's old, thirsty 7 Series that they just couldn't give away. So I wouldn't be surprised if that car sold for half of its retail price to the first owner. And yeah, it just spent a long time sitting around going nowhere. I think eventually being sold from Park Lane. So I suspect they found somebody that didn't really give two hoots about the fuel economy.
So it probably sat about nearly around 4 years then, something like that.
Potentially.
Wow, on a dealer's forecourt.
Yeah.
That's mad.
I think it probably got passed to a few dealers as well, because I remember from the paperwork there's a few different dealers in there that have clearly had the car but never sold it. And it's never good when that happens to a car. Right?
No.
Ever. So let's go back to your Golf, because it's the Golf that we're talking about, isn't it? Not the Maestro.
No, not the Maestro. That'll come later.
Is the Maestro crusty as well?
No, it's actually incredibly solid for a British Leyland product. It's had to have a little bit of welding, but nothing really major. All the major rot points where they go hasn't really got any issues. It's got a little bit of bubbling on the joins of the A and the B pillars. That's just common because that's where the roof attaches to the top.
Yeah, that's
and
fine.
It's got a little bit on the A and the A pillar and the top sides of the roof. But this is all superficial. It's all stuff I'm planning to have fixed up this year. Overall, it's actually a massive survivor. So since we are talking about the Maestro, before we go on to the Golf, I'll tell you a little bit about that car. So the way we met was through my Maestro.
Yep.
My first one, I had the Apple 2000 car, the N669 DRP. And when people watch your main channel videos, when you're in your garage, they'll see that the steering wheel from that car is actually hanging up in the background, something I gave you not too long ago.
Yep.
And I ended up scrapping that car because I had been given another Maestro. Somebody contacted me and said, hey, I know you're into these weird cars. There's one in a barn that's been sat there for about 19 years would you be interested in it? And I was like, well, it depends on the price, what they want for it, really. They said, the house and everything is being sold. You've just got to get it out and you can have it. And I saw a few photos of it, and it looked quite dilapidated from the pictures. And I was like, right, this is only going to be good as a parts car. I'll take some bits off this and use it to restore the current one I've got. But when we got it out, we realised, oh, wow, no, this is actually way, way more solid. It was only a little patch on the sill that needed plating, and it had a little bit of rust on one of the arches, which has now all been done and treated at a local garage. And quite an old school welder guy who was doing stuff around that era, welded in by hand, all new bits of the arch. He fabricated it and everything, then he painted it. Like anything, it's not like a full respray, so you do notice some of the colour difference, but it looks pretty good for the amount of money I paid for that sun, which was less than a couple £100. But yeah, so this car... It turns out had a full service history. That I had a folder stacked with receipts, mostly from the original garage as well, and it only had 40,000 miles on the clock.
Wow!
So it was bought brand new in 1990, so very late into the Maestro's life, and it was bought by an older chap, and it was not too far from roughly where we are now. I found it just outside of Ipswich, so a local car to the area, and it's bought by an older chap, and he just didn't do loads of miles in it. But every time anything went wrong, back to the main dealer. Anytime there was needed bulbs, wiper blades, everything done at the main dealer, which was Kerridge's of Needham Market, which is unfortunately closed down now, because I really wanted to go back there and get some photos outside it with the car, but
they're still sort of there. They had closed down, but the last time I went past, because I got a friend out that way, half of it still seemed to have some cars in it. I think the other half might be a hot tub showroom or something daft. But Kerridge's are one of these places that was a great loss to the automotive world, because they'd been in business for something like 100 years or something crazy like that.
It was. So they did TVR and things like that as well, didn't they?
Yeah, TVR and Noble, so they really know how to pick them.
Yeah, exactly. British Leyland, Rover, TVR and Noble. You can imagine what were the TVRs of the eras in the 90s?
So that would be Chimera, Griffith, and then turned into Tuscan, Cerbera as well, that sort of stuff.
So imagine a nice Chimera sitting next to your red four-door Maestro Club on the showroom.
Yeah.
Oh, that would have been quite the different worlds there, wouldn't it? But
love Chimera.
Yeah, he had all the service history, all that kind of stuff with it. But he ended up parking it up in 2003 because he was an older chap and he just stopped driving. And then unfortunately he passed away in 2017. And, the family needed to figure out what to do with it. So at the end of 2022, I got it for free. I didn't have to pay anything for it.
Wow.
Which was really nice. But the guy was really happy to do it because he knew I was into the cars, and he knew I'd do right by it and get it going. And I did. It's been really good. Mechanically, I've done a lot of work to it. It's spot on. The bodywork needs, as I said, a couple of little bits of tidying up, but it's one of those cars that is quite a rare example to be this solid. And being in a barn for 19 years, I think, out of the weather has saved it from rotting away.
So ironically, my Citroën BX, which is an ongoing project and has been ongoing for quite some time now, but hopefully will return to me this year, that was parked in a field.
Okay.
For about 15 years. It made an appearance on a TV show called Flippin' Bangers.
Okay.
In which they tried to do the sort of wheeler-dealer thing, but with a much reduced budget,
Yes.
where they were going to buy a car for 500 quid, I think spend 500 quid on it, and then try and turn a profit. And if that was a show from 20 years ago, I think they would have had some legs, but it was only from about 5 or 6 years ago or so, and 500 quid then was already not really a lot. But this car had been parked up in this random field. You see them a lot more in the States, less so here, where somebody just has a collection of stuff outdoors sitting there that doesn't really seem to do anything or go anywhere. But the BX apparently may have been saved in part by the fact that it was parked up in a field, because it's hydropneumatic, or oleopneumatic to be correct about it, and it's one of those cars that when it's off and hasn't run for a little while, it will just sit right down on the floor. Now, if you park it in a field with some long grass around it and it's dry, when it sits down on the floor, it'll almost create like a vacuum or like a seal around the bottom of it, and stuff won't get in.
Interesting. So it wasn't rotten underneath it then.
There were a couple of little patches that needed to be done, but compared with other cars that would have seen continuous use, particularly here in Britain where we salt the roads throughout winter, it was very, very good. Now, different parts of the car will then rust because what you don't have is the air going over it to move the water. So I believe where the door mounts just below the A-pillar, I think that needed a little bit of work done to it. But yeah, my car was sat in a field for 15 years and somehow it survived just fine. Annoyingly, on the TV show, they said that it was a very low mileage one owner car. The mileage, as far as we can tell, is genuine. And
what's it got on it mileage wise?
I think 60-something thousand.
Okay.
So it's pretty good, for a 1990 car. It's a late BX, 16-valve GTI Phase 1. Ooh. It's a lovely, lovely thing. It's got an iconic little spoiler at the back. And BXs are a car. I've never really ever wanted a BX. What I actually wanted, we'll get onto this in a minute, was something like a 306. And I missed out on the chance to buy a 306 for 800 quid. A 306 GTI 6, I should point out. Not some scraggly old diesel or something.
Were they like 2 litres, something like that, weren't they?
Yeah. And a decent amount of power. I think it's actually an evolution of the engine that's in the BX.
Yeah.
But nowadays, people want like 10 grand plus for a tidy 306, and I'm not paying £10,000 plus. That's a BMW M3 money. I'm not paying M3 money.
It's the same for Peugeot 106 GTIs, my ultimate little French hatchback, and they're just out of my price range now.
And the fact is, I think with a lot of these cars, unless you have a real particular attachment to them, you have to think long and hard about, like, do I really want to spend that much on this? And for stuff like the 106, my buddy Laurie of Laurie's Mechanical Marvels has a 106 that I think he might have been gifted. We'll get him on the channel to interrogate him properly at some point. But that car, I've driven it. That's actually really good fun, provided you're round the lanes. If you want to take it on a motorway, it just won't have it.
What was it? Was it a GTI? A 1.1?
No. Yeah, a 1.1, it's got like a name like Calypso or something daft. It's like a really sunny sounding
edition. Like a Zest or a Zest 2 or something like that, was it? Yeah.
I'd have to look it up. I know it's been off the road for a little while, and I think he was looking at doing an engine transplant. We worked out, I believe, when we had it looked at a while ago, it was already on its possibly second or maybe even third engine anyway, as they had a bit of a history, and some of these cars get owned by people that just don't really look after them or care for them.
Like me when I had them in the early 2010s. I broke my Peugeot 106s so much that there was just not any bolts in them by that point that I hadn't touched. I knew so much about them that I'd love to have one now and do them up, because the 1.1s were great. Yeah. They were so lightweight, and that 60 horsepower they had from that engine always felt like more. And it was always something about it where it would actually give you a bit of pull and a bit of shove in second gear sometimes, and you wouldn't expect that out of the car so small.
No. Now, we're indulging in shameless full nostalgia in this episode. Now, the only downside of missing out our cohort is that he's of a slightly different vintage to us. We're both in our sort of early to mid-30s. I'm just a little bit older. I am technically a child of the 1980s. But that means I was getting interested in cars throughout the sort of 1990s, and then I eventually got able to drive them in the mid-2000s. And going to sound very... have you noticed as you sort of hit 30 and so on, you start saying things, and then immediately after you go, I never thought those words would escape from my mouth, because that's the sort of thing that like a granddad would say. Well, I'm going to do that now. I don't think we realised how good we had it when we were younger, because I don't know about you, but certainly for myself, all of my friends, when we started driving, there was a great selection of actually pretty decent cars that would have been chiefly of sort of 1990s vintage. They were kind of 10 years old or so at the time, that could be bought for a few hundred quid and would work and would run and generally wouldn't be particularly pretty, but they'd get you from A to B. They were easy to buy. They were easy to run. Insurance sometimes wasn't quite so cheap. Famously, if you recall, in the UK, there was an advertising or marketing campaign for the Citroën Saxo, whereby you could get free insurance for a year if you bought one. And I seem to recall the VTR, which was the 8-valve, I think you could get it if you were 17 or 18.
Yes.
But you had to be a little older to get the VTS, which is the 16-valve. And I do know a few people that for 2 or 3 years consecutively bought brand spanking new Citroën Saxos just because when it came time and the year was up, they couldn't afford the insurance, but they could afford to go back and buy another one.
Yeah, that is very much a thing of its time that I don't think you really see anymore. I don't think do any manufacturers even offer free insurance on cars anymore. Is that a thing?
Doubt it. I highly doubt it. Tell you what, do you know what I missed out on? And to this day, it still haunts me. I was at university. I was studying. I would have been about 18, possibly 19 at this point, because I went to university pretty early on. And my dad called me and said, yeah, I'm here over at this warehouse where this chap called Charlie is. And he's got a car that he might be selling. Do you want to come and have a look at it? I was like, oh, I don't know, Dad, what sort of car is it? He's like, it's a Porsche. I was like, well, a Porsche, what, for me? He said, yeah, come and have a look at it. So I turned up, and it was a very early Porsche 944 in black, so pre-facelift, real proper angular, 1980s outside and in. The dashboard had basically fallen in half because that's what they did. They got dry and they cracked and they disintegrated. It was a bizarre looking thing. I think it said it had something like 30,000 miles on the clock, but those only had 5-digit odometers.
So it's probably more like 130.
It was either 130 or 230.
Yeah.
Now, the guy was selling it because I think he might actually have already gone. He was emigrating. So he's leaving the country, couldn't take the car with him. He'd just spent 230 quid on new full-colour Porsche centre caps for the wheels, and the whole car could have been mine for 700 quid.
Oh, what year was this?
This would be about 2008, give or take.
Now, the question is, how much are they worth now?
I mean, that particular car probably only be worth about 2 or 3 grand. It probably wouldn't be worth that much more. Now, at this time, I can't remember if I had a car or not. If I was still at university, which I think I might have been, I didn't have a car. I only bought one when I actually finished with the uni. And so I was driving this thing around the car park, and you're like, yeah, it's a bit scraggly. Yeah, it's a bit rough around the edges. Like, no, it's not the Porsche of my dreams. But it is a Porsche, and it could be mine for 700 quid. Now, 2 drawbacks. First off, I didn't have 700 quid to buy the car. And secondly, I definitely didn't have the, I think, 1,400 quid it would have been to insure me on it. And Dad was definitely not going to buy me a Porsche. So it was like, okay. I mean, I was so upset about the fact that that didn't work out. I mean, it was for the best because it probably would have broken. Something probably would have gone wrong with it, and it would have cost me more than the value of it to fix it.
Do you know what? This is exactly it. Sometimes the best cars are the ones that got away. Yeah. And the reason is because they'll always in your head be this amazing thing you could have had, you could have bought, look beautiful in the pictures, beautiful in the adverts, you lusted after it. But the reality is, especially if it's something which is a bit more highly strung and temperamental, is especially if you're at that age and that budget, it would have financially ruined you.
Yeah.
It would have probably ended up costing so much to repair things, and from deferred maintenance, because if a car is that cheap, and it's still the same trope now with S-Classes, 7 Series, Audi A6s, A8s, all that stuff that, have got these luxurious, wonderful engines and lots of power and all of this spec. You just have to think, well, hang on, that first big bill is going to be in line with a car that would have cost £80,000 new, because even though they're 3 or 4 grand now, they are still what was an 80 grand car. The parts will be expensive, and that's what sometimes a lot of people forget when they go to purchase cars. We've all been there, I'm sure.
Yes, we have.
But, in many ways, the fact you didn't buy that Porsche and you've got that, I almost had that, is kind of a better story than going, oh my God, I had this Porsche and it ruined me.
Yeah, I would have been very, very upset about that. It took then a long, long time before I was actually able to drive a Porsche properly on the road. I think it was probably another 4 or 5 years or something like that. I was still very grateful for the opportunity because I wasn't very old at all. I was in my early 20s, and getting to drive Porsches around for work was fantastic. There was a couple of opportunities where I got loaned cars on the condition that I was going to go and take some photos or video with them. And yeah, to have something like a Cayman just for a day, wow, that was amazing. That was the life. But they're expensive cars even now. Like a Cayman, I mean, I've just bought a Cayman, which is very, very broken. And
yes, is the engine not in many pieces? Because was it bore score or something like that?
Yeah, bore score. It's shot to hell. So that's going to be revived towards the end of the year.
What's your little podcast sneak peek? What's your plans with it? What are you thinking doing with the engine?
Oh, that's not much of a secret. So that's being uprated. It's a 3.4 litre now, and it's going to be the only 4.1 in the country.
Okay.
So that's pretty significant.
It's going to have some shove then.
Oh, yeah. No, it's going to have some real go. I mean, I'm very, very excited because this year I'm trying not to buy any cars because I'm trying to do sensible adult stuff. But there are a whole bunch of projects which might, if the stars align, all come home this year.
Yes.
The BX being one. And that I only really got to drive that car about 2 or 3 times before I had to go away. So I still feel like it doesn't even feel like it's mine. The Cayman, I've also never driven, because I didn't want to drive it. The guy actually drove it to my house to deliver it, and then I never drove it anywhere. I got it trailered because it was bellowing smoke out of the back, and I didn't want to make the situation any worse than it already was. The S2000 is now painfully close to being home. I did actually get to hear that the other day, and it sounds angry. Ooh. That thing. It sounds like a touring car now. Like, it's amazing. So, but more on that on the main channel. But to help us get back on track, I set each of us a bit of a sort of loose challenge, really, to just go online and find some interesting stuff for us to discuss that costs no more than £5,000. Because you see, we were lucky. We grew up in this age where you could go out there and you could buy stuff for very little, keep it running, and it was all generally mechanically simple enough stuff, and parts were fairly plentiful that you could keep one of these cars at least limping on for quite some time.
Well, here's an example of this. I had a £350 E46 318 for a while, and that was about 10, 11 years ago now. And I ran that on a shoestring, and eventually I sold it to somebody who crashed it on Great Yarmouth Seafront.
Oh no, a saloon compact? Or
saloon. It wasn't a compact. I probably wouldn't have bought it if it was a compact, but a saloon, absolutely.
Compact, you dodged a bullet. I had for quite a while as my car an E46 330 Ci Club Sport, and then my partner at the time needed a new car, and she quite liked my BM, but she thought it was a bit big. So obvious thing, get a compact. And we bought this compact, and even though they were the same age, from the same manufacturer, and hers was on a lot less mileage than mine, the difference in quality was enormous. Compacts aren't even built in the same country.
No.
I think they're built in South America or something like that. Regardless, it felt like it was just from a different brand. Everything you touched, everything you felt in the compact, it just wasn't as nicely screwed together. I didn't like it so much. But here we have a few random things. I've gone on the internet and found this. I thought this would appeal to you because I did set a limit of £5,000, but we don't have to spend the £5,000. How about this? It is a 1992 white Peugeot 205 1.8D GRD with barely any mileage on it, just the 223,000 miles, but it's an old diesel. I think it'll take it. And you know what? It's a little bit of a cutie, and it's all yours for the princely sum of £1,000.
Oh, let's have a little look at this.
Here you go.
Oh,
look at that.
This. Oh, that is beautiful. I know those aren't factory spec hubcaps, but they just fit the era just so well. That is a bit of me, that. I've got a friend called Chloe, and she loves these old Peugeots 205s. I think she's had hers might have been a 1.4, 1.5D.
I honestly don't ask me, but I mean, I suspect that might even be a non-turbo diesel.
Oh yes, I tell you what, Peugeot 106 1.5D. It was naturally aspirated. Possibly one of the slowest things I have ever driven. It was painfully slow, and it was loud and it was rattly. But I tell you what, that thing got 60 miles per gallon everywhere, and it went all across the country. It was one of my partner's back in the day's car, and that was great, that thing. It ended up succumbing to rust because it was a French car that had got driven. But, what a car. No, I love these kind of like old Peugeot diesel engines and things like that. They were just from an era where, much like Volkswagen in the mid 2014, 2015 era, didn't care about emissions either. Yeah. They just had nothing to stop them.
But you bought diesels then just because they didn't stop.
Yeah.
Like, they weren't actually even that economical. They certainly weren't fast.
But there was just no electronic control. There was nothing to go wrong on them.
Yeah, it was a van engine. Like, you actually can, when you drive those, you can understand why people even now are somewhat hesitant to have a diesel. Obviously, lots of other things have now knackered diesel's reputation.
Yes.
Yeah. But if you experienced a 1980s or 1990s diesel, oh my word. I remember when one of my school friends, Henry, his dad bought the then brand spanking new BMW E60 535D.
Ooh, that was quite the thing.
That was a rocket ship, because that was one of the first times that a diesel engine, not only was it actually quite refined, quite smooth and everything else, but it went like stink. And I seem to recall, this will tell you how he drove it. I think he only got about 25 to the gallon out of it.
Yeah, that's somebody for pleasure, not miles per gallon. There.
Yeah, the same chap actually also had to daily drive for a little bit his Ford GT40.
Amazing. Amazing. That is, what a world that people used to live in back then.
Yeah,
world.
It was a car that he built out of like a shell that he'd found in a barn, but it's a legitimate continuation GT40, and he had a Land Rover of some description stolen, I think, and the insurance didn't pay out. So he was stuck without a car. I think something daft had happened, like he'd kind of forgotten to declare some points or something like that. Oh. Don't quote me on it. But the insurance company went, yeah, no, we're not paying you out for that one. And so then he's like, oh crikey, the only car I've got is the GT40. And he had to drive that through winter until he could save up the money to buy something else again.
Oh, wow. That's not something you'd see happening today, let's be honest, is it?
No.
Well, let me tell you what I have got for you. I have gone full JDM.
Oh, okay, all right.
Well, actually, no, they're not. They're not Japanese, are they? Where is Daihatsu from again?
Daihatsu?
No, are they Japan?
You know what? I am going to have to consult the internet on this one, because I don't want to sound silly. I want to say it's Japanese.
I think it is.
But let's just check before we make fools of ourselves. You know, I think on some of these podcast recordings, I'm going, it is Japanese.
Yeah,
it is Japanese. They're from Osaka. There you go.
Well, what I have for you is a 2003 Daihatsu Sirion 1.3 SL with a whole 100 horsepower, and you'll know how it's good is because it's got a spoiler.
Oh, wow. At 825 quid.
Yeah.
This is actually pretty cool, you know. I also don't think there's anything wrong with a Daihatsu. I'm pretty sure that we had a Daihatsu. We had a... I remember so well. I think I got offered one of these recently. But there's a Daihatsu they did that looks a bit like a minivan. Only I don't think it's a K car, but it's not much bigger than a K car. But it looks like a minivan. And we took Mum's Daihatsu in for service. And they said to us that, that's what your courtesy car is. And I wasn't particularly old at the time. I looked at it and said, that's what Sooty and Sweep drive.
Oh, I love that.
Yeah. So, surreal things that happen. I was once at an Iron Maiden concert
Okay.
where they tried to get everybody to sing the theme tune to Sooty and Sweep.
Brilliant.
Can you remember the theme tune to Sooty and Sweep?
No, you'll have to remind me. Cause
Well, the thing is that nobody else could either. So it's just sort of, 30,000 people going, yeah. And apparently, like the night before, they'd lost their power. So they basically just kept everybody amused by just singing random stuff.
Brilliant. Brilliant.
I know, right? So so I had a mate that drove the, I think it was a 205, the 205 Chug, he called it, with 3 matching wheels, and one guest, wheel. Ride height that was comical. I mean, you could have rented out a space in the arch, in London, that would be worth a lot of money. And it was so soft. You'd be convinced that the dampers were just not connected. That's how it rode. But it just refused to die. So he had that. One of the other girls in the class had a then pretty new Citroën C3 Pluriel.
Ooh.
Remember those?
Yeah,
That's
I
with
do.
the roof you've got to disassemble.
Yes.
It's one of the daftest ideas ever. You've got to disassemble it and then you don't really have anywhere to put it.
Citroën did do some weird, quirky things. Like I remember when was it the C4 Cactus came out, whatever it is. And I'm like, why have they glued some rubber matting to the side of that car?
Yeah. Apparently they're actually quite good.
Yeah,
And I like quirky French stuff.
Yeah, I do as well.
In fact, if you want quirky French, now you could be sensible. So I found here, this is on Auto Trader, for the princely sum, 50 quid more than your Daihatsu there, £875, you can have yourself a Renault Clio.
Ooh.
1.2 TCE Dynamique. That's a 2008 spec Clio, which in my head, that's what I generally think of when I think of a Clio, that or the generation before.
Yeah.
So it's not like Clio Williams' age. It's a bit newer and nicer than that. But, for a young person, that's actually a pretty darn good, solid car. Clio's a good size. You can get your friends in it. I think part of the issue that we have is, of course, we look at what we could get for the money 20 years ago. And then it's really easy to forget that it was 20 years ago and that, everything's gone up in price in that time.
In my head, that Clio is probably still only 5 or 6 years old.
Yeah. Oh, no. All right. So do you want something really, really like hideously outlandish? Now,
Go on then.
if this were a Top Gear challenge, I would have spent all of my money on it and come home only with £1 because for £4,999, you can today on Auto Trader have the American icon that is the Pontiac Fiero.
Oh, wow.
Yeah, in red with black alloy wheels. I assume they're alloys. They do look like alloys. A nice big spoiler on the back. 111,000 miles. It's a manual. It's a petrol. In fact, more than that, it's the 2.8 litre 6-cylinder American sports car right-hand drive as well, which is really unusual, in an eye-catching maroon colour exterior.
I can get on this kind of vibe with you with American cars.
Yeah.
For £4,500, you can have a 4.1 litre V8 from 1987, and it's a convertible.
Oh.
It is a Cadillac Alante.
Oh,
in a fetching beige colour. Look at that.
Oh, my word. That's amazing. Oh, those chrome alloys as well. That's spectacular. Oh, and it's got the classic automatic gear lever as well. Like that interior, that's fantastic. See, now, do you know what I love with cars like this? I think a hard top option. That's not a folding hard top, is it? No. It's got to be a hard top on it. Now, you know what I find interesting with cars like this, right? Is that when you're looking at stuff that's now 20, 30, 40 years old or so, and it's worth all of about, £1,000, £2,000, something like that. You look at it and you go, yeah, you know what? That's, not the perfect car. I think most people spending £1,000 or £2,000 on a car are not shopping for their dream car.
No.
In many cases, it might be your first car.
Yes.
Or I do also know people that have lots of money, but they go to the station every day. So you just want something that's going to get you there, get you back, heater works, aircon works, and if you come back and it's got a new scratch or dent on it, you're not going to care.
Yeah.
And stuff like that little Clio there, because that's the sort of car that, you could use as a station car. you could use as a car to take somewhere to a show or something, or again, if you want to drive into the city where parking is difficult, or if you've got a child that's learning to drive, they can drive it. There's lots of cars that I like, which are the perfect car that, somebody that's got, children of now driving age, they can buy it officially for the child, but actually that when the kid's gone back to university or so on, you're going to have an absolute riot in some of these things.
There is something nice about a car you don't care about.
Yeah.
But the problem with me is I end up caring about the cars I shouldn't care about.
Oh, yeah. And that's where it all goes wrong, because Bangernomics dictates that if you're going to do it properly, you must spend only on the car what is absolutely and strictly necessary. And like you, I want all of my cars to be in really good condition. And this can be expensive. But here's the thing that I was spectacularly failing at getting to, which is that all of these cars, you look at them when they're 500 quid, £1,000 or whatever, yeah, fine, okay, great. It serves a purpose, right? But you got to think, at some point, somebody in history walked into a dealership and said, yeah, you see that hearing aid beige Camry over there with the brown velour interior, the 4-speed automatic, the gutless 4-cylinder naturally aspirated engine, no style, no pizzazz, a modicum of economy, and its chief real thing being reliability. Somebody went into a showroom to spend real money. A car is probably the second or maybe the most expensive thing any of us ever buy. Somebody walked into a showroom, looked at that and went, Dolores, that right there is a piece of me. Mm-hmm. And you do just wonder, don't you, sometimes, where you're like, somebody really did that. Somebody really walked into a showroom and went, brown Cadillac convertible? Oh, yes, please. Thank you very much.
You just know that was a Florida cruiser, don't you?
Oh, yeah. You love it. And I do envy the guys in the States, because particularly in the southern states, stuff can just be left outside for 30 years and it'll be fine.
You'll get a cracked dashboard and your paint will start to fade colour and burn. But other than that, the rest of the car will be fine.
Yeah, it'll work. Whereas here you leave a car for 30 years outdoors. There's a first-gen Jaguar XK that's in a little, it's in a garden basically, on a route that I take fairly frequently when I go to the cinema. And for the last few years, I've been watching it just return back to the earth. And I'm so tempted just to stop off there, knock on the door and say, can I please buy that Jag off you and save it? But I know if the top side of it is that bad, the underside is going to just be horrendous.
Absolutely the amount of money you would spend on it saving it, you'd have to really want to save that car.
Yeah, and at that point, there are plenty of others out there that are worth, only a little bit more, but don't need saving. They're just they're just going concern, and that is the flip side, I think, of some of these cars that were once commonplace and cheap becoming valuable. Is that now a really good, nice, interesting Ford Capri could be worth 50 grand or sometimes more if it's a special one. Somebody is going to be far more willing to spend 30 or 40,000 quid saving it. But when the thing was only going to be worth 5 grand when you were done, well, what's the point? Why would you save it? Even stuff like Ferrari Dinos and so on, they just weren't worth enough money. And to do a proper job on them, you had to invest some serious money that nobody would, because it's never going to be worth it.
Do you know what? It's funny that you should mention a Ferrari Dino.
Oh.
In my search on Auto Trader, for £3,999, I have found you a Ferrari Dino. Except
I've seen this. I nearly printed it out. Yeah, and it looks, if that was a real Dino, I'm not sure I'd pay £4,000 for it in that condition. Oh, there's no engine in it. Oh, is there an engine in it? Oh, no, there is an engine in it. What engine is that?
What does it say?
It says Ferrari Dino replica kit car. Engine start. I love that.
Is that a statement or a question?
I love this as well. It's a really optimistic piece. Interior has been taken apart to be done, but obviously there is no time and space to do it. Logbook present, spare 2-litre boxer engine available. Okay. Rear glass available, not fitted. Custom made alloy with one L rims from one solid aluminium block. Built on VW Beetle 60s. I thought that looked like an air cooling unit. Built on a Beetle chassis. All mechanical and body frame parts. Oh, my word. In 1984, RW Kit Cars took over Perry Automotive Development's Karma project. He'd been manufacturing the Karma since 1982. I'm going to make an educated guess that there might be a reason that people stopped doing replicas of these. It's the same reason that everybody stops doing replica Ferraris. Oh, crikey, there's a picture of the chassis here. And from the front to the back, there is a backbone which looks about half a foot wide, and that is all that is basically connecting the front and the rear of that car.
Oh, okay. Safety? What safety? Torsional and structural rigidity?
It's not that the original is going to be like, 5-star Euro NCAP anymore, but that looks like it's got all of the sort of, stiffness of a Bond bug.
Well, just look at how that F40 that recently had an accident flew to pieces.
Yeah, right. And those did cost a lot of money when they were new. So, yeah. I see, the funny thing with me, okay, I'll freely admit this. I got into cheap cars the wrong way. So when I was 17 and I learned to drive, a few things had happened in my life, one of which was that my parents separated. And this left us in a situation where we weren't struggling. It would be very unfair to say that. But Mum had her car, which was an E46 330 saloon, automatic, lovely thing. I think I drove it like once or twice around a car park, And that was a great car, and I really loved it. But, unsurprisingly, as a 17-year-old, there was absolutely no chance whatsoever of me getting on the insurance. Now, today, insurance for young people is extraordinarily punitive, and I think is a large part of why so many people just don't bother getting a car. And I would love to see something done about that. I actually would like to see us introduce a class of car a little bit like the K cars, where we could say, okay, if you can build a car that is under a certain weight, under a certain size, under a certain power, there will be lots of financial incentives for people to buy one. They have stuff like this in Europe all the time. So certainly in the Netherlands, they have like tiny little, like you would almost call them like a cycle car. Like they're like a 2/3 scale smart car. And in Germany, they have the same thing whereby, have you seen like the Fiat 500 where the wheels at the back have been pushed together?
No, I haven't.
So it is exactly what you might imagine. It's a modern day Fiat 500, but if they push the wheels in the back together and limit the speed it can do, then it classifies as like a quadricycle or a tricycle or something daft.
A la Citroën Ami.
Yeah, and you can then drive it as a younger person. And you can just sort of put it back if you want to. Now, I have seen these things in Germany. And I would like to see this be done and happen. But, yeah, even when I was learning to drive near 20 years ago, insurance was expensive. So the car had to go. And Mum basically said to me, we're going to sell the BMW. We owned it outright. It was worth about £15,000. So quite a bit of money. And she said, you can choose the car that we get next. And there are only 2 requirements, really. One of which is that it's going to be insurable for you. And the other of which is that it's going to be a car that's going to be sensible, dependable, reliable, whatever. So I actually had a great time going to lots of different car dealerships, driving lots of different cars.
And how old were you at this point?
I was 17.
17, okay.
And so I was still at school. I wasn't there for too much longer, but I was still at school. And I actually thought it was really important that I went in as a 17-year-old because I know that Mum had some really negative experiences going into garages as a woman. And I figure the same garage that's going to give a woman grief is probably the same garage that's going to give a 17-year-old grief as well. So if I go in there as a 17-year-old and I get treated nicely and with respect and everything else, then that, bodes well. I drove all sorts. Drove the Renault Clio, didn't like that. Drove the Suzuki Swift, I quite like that. That was funny because I phoned them up and I said, hello, we're looking for a Swift, not a Swift Sport, because probably, again, on insurance, might have been marginal. And we got a budget of about £15,000. Have you got anything? And he said to me, how many do you want? He said, do you want like a pair of them? We can get you a pair of them. So we definitely didn't want to go to Mercedes because we'd already been put off them a long time ago and they wouldn't have had anything suitable anyway, I don't think. And in the end, I wound up recommending to her, and she bought a Citroën C4 by Loeb. It's a special edition they did, which I'm pretty sure Sebastian Loeb doesn't even know about to this day. They put his name on the side on a little like shiny mirror strip that eventually sort of faded, so you couldn't even read it anymore. It was effectively a Citroën C4 VTS. This is the generation where the outside of the steering wheel moved and the middle of it didn't.
I remember
that was its kind of selling point. It was black with the red interior, and I think the other choice was red with the black interior. But it was like a black outer on the seat, red inserts, quite nice. Had a silly thing where you could put a perfume canister in the aircon, which after you've used the first two, you never ever buy ever again. But it was a 1.6 diesel.
Very in vogue at the time.
Yeah. As we previously discussed on the podcast, that meant that the insurance was basically as a 1.6, 110 horsepower, and reasonable torque, also very economical. I then got to drive that quite a bit, used it to go to school once I'd sort of run out of insurance on Nan's van. Drove that around, loved it. I then eventually went off to uni, so I then just didn't have a car for a bit. But when I came home, I could borrow that, use that, everything else. Her partner then wound up using it, and the poor thing, it didn't have a very good life. Somebody drove into it in the middle of the night.
Oh.
But because I think the key had disintegrated, they had to lock it and unlock it with just the actual blade. The remote fob had died. And when you do that, it didn't set the alarm. So they didn't realise in the night that it was their car they'd been driven into. And they put a huge dent in the side of this thing. It was enormous. It was like a 2-foot wide dent, right? But the car soldiered on. I think it got to about 140, 150,000 miles. And yeah, basically, then it was scrapped. I remember Mum texted myself and my sister. At the time, Mum's husband was gravely ill. My grandmother had also been seriously ill as well. And we get this text that goes, oh, kids, really sad news. And I'm like, oh, no. And open it, the Citroen's been scrapped. And we were both like, don't do that. Like, no, it's just a car. It's fine.
Oh, my goodness.
Like, yes, we're a little bit sad about it, but like, oh, my God.
The heart attack you nearly gave us would have finished off your children as well as the car.
Well, like when you're on the news or whatever, you go onto your website or whatever, you walk past a newsstand, where they still exist these days, and you see, Robert De Niro, and you go, no, not Robert. And you go, has been spotted, waiting for a table in a restaurant. You're like, oh, thank God. You're just like, oh my word, because your favorite people in the world, they get to a certain age where you see their face on a website, and you go, no. Please have just done something a bit controversial. Not so controversial that I have to pretend I don't like you anymore, but can you have been rude to a waiter or something?
There are two people which I'm always, I don't want to hear any news stories about them because I'm always thinking it's going to be them.
Yeah.
And it's Sir Patrick Stewart and Stevie Wonder.
Oh yeah, no, I'm with you. Sir Patrick, no, I'll chip in 50 quid to have him cryogenically frozen.
Yeah,
no trouble at all. Like, I'll do that happily. So we had the Citroen, which is quite new. I then, when I did eventually buy a car, bought my Peugeot 407 SW 1.6 HDI, which we've talked about in previous video, and I was able to afford that. It was about 4,000 quid, I think. And I could afford that because I'd been left some money in trust by my grandfather. And when I reached 18, I had access to it. And there wasn't millions in it or anything like that. But there was enough in there to buy me a car and also some furnishings for my first flat. So I was very fortunate that I was able to buy a car that was probably a lot nicer than most of my friends' first cars. And then that turned into my BMW 330. And then I had the 6 Series. And I never was interested in hatchbacks. Never really wanted them. It was an estate car if I wanted something practical, or a saloon or a coupe if I didn't. I wanted nice big meaty engines because at the time I was working in an industry where I could charge mileage. So the car being thirsty didn't matter. Yeah, it didn't bother me. I charged my 45p a mile and that's it. I then realized after a little while I had to kind of try and be a bit sensible. I managed for a little while to have a BMW Z4M coupe, which I actually was so worried about because it was my stepmother's car, but it was also on really low mileage. It was on like 20-something thousand miles when I got it. And I was really worried about depreciating this car. I was terrified of it because I had a huge amount of money sunk in that thing. And I did a trip around Europe in it with my mum, really enjoyed it, and then got back, literally sold it. In fact, I listed it while I was away and sold it, or agreed to sell it while I was away. Yeah. And so I was sort of so relieved almost that had gone. Mum had a couple of nice cars as well that I drove on occasion. She bought a couple of old 911s, again, back when they weren't worth big money. Maybe talk about those in another episode, but I enjoyed those, but they weren't my car. I then eventually moved to doing YouTube. So I had at one point a Peugeot 207 van with 70 lazy French horses. Ooh. That was my work wagon.
That was a Petron, wasn't it?
That was diesel.
Oh, it was diesel. Oh,
yeah, diesel.
So that would have been very similar to the engine I had in my Mazda 2. Because
they 1.4 HDI.
They were shared in Ford, Mazda, Peugeot. They all were in, and Volvo as well.
Yeah. Oh wow.
Yeah, the Volvo had the 1.6 HDI engine basically. Because my brother's got a Volvo V50, and it was pretty much identical engine to my 1.4
in
Mazda
a V50.
2. In a V50, 1.6 110. Wow. It's the E something. It's one of the eco ones. It's got those tiny little weird looking, almost like flat wheels, so like aero wheel kind of things.
Yeah. A 1.4 is not enough for a V50.
Oh no, so it wasn't 1. It was the 1.6 version. It wasn't the 1.4.
Okay. All right,
1.6 with 110 horse,
which is what we had in the C4.
Yes.
Yeah. Which is actually a much better engine. Like it's got a lot more go in it. Like, and if it's just you and a mate in a car, it's fine.
I've driven it a couple of times. His Volvo, and actually, it's not bad.
Yeah,
it's not bad.
The 1.4 and 207 was just about adequate for the 207 because it's a van, and when it's unladen, it's not that bad. And I did put a lot of kit in it, but it doesn't weigh as much as other stuff might. And I rarely travelled with 2 people and kit. Then when I started YouTube, things changed quite dramatically because I sold all my kit and bought Lotus Evora. So, all of a sudden I got a £70,000 car on the driveway. Except I then, at the time, also basically gave up my filmmaking career. So what I had was a car. What I didn't have was an income. Mm-hmm. And I decided that I really wanted YouTube to work. So over the next few years, I eventually had to sell the Lotus because I had to find money to live on. Yeah. I was in a very fortunate position where I was not really ever going to be made homeless, but neither were my family going to just, treat me as a charity case and just pay for me to just exist. Yeah. I had, if I wanted anything beyond absolute basic, food and board, I had to earn it. And I'm well aware of the fact that, for a lot of people, that is not a given. So I'm eternally 100%. Grateful to my family for supporting me. But I sold the Lotus. I had a couple of other cars as well at the time. They got sold as well that I bought. I had an XL and an Elise. They both went over the years. And come sort of year 2 or 3, things were getting a little better, but I was still spending money. So basically, you had to sell cars to effectively pay for groceries and fuel and everything else when you're trying to build a YouTube channel. But because of this, I now had this real interest in cars, which was now monetizable, but I didn't really have much income. And I wasn't earning enough whereby I could just go and buy other fancy cars or whatever. If I wanted to buy something, it had to be something pretty darn cheap. So I decided to go halves with Laurie off Laurie's Mechanical Marvels, and we bought sight unseen an MG ZS 180, early one, off eBay for £525.
Ooh.
And that became my first hit video. It got over 300,000 views when the channel had like 1 or 2,000 subscribers. That was amazing. And it's one of these videos where if I'd known it was going to be such a hit, we would have put a lot more effort into it, but we really didn't think it was going to.
That's always the way, because I've on and off done YouTube over the years. I do it now again because, like you, I'm trying to make a thing out of it. I'm trying to make a kind of a career, because I've always done technology stuff. I do computer repairs. I've got a computer business. That's the main thing. But I'd love to be able to just play with old tech all day, and that's what I'm doing now. But I've had videos before in other lives when I've done automotive content. I did tech years ago on another channel that no longer exists, and it's always the videos that you don't think are going to do anything, and they're just kind of a quick throwaway thing that end up getting the most views sometimes. And it's almost frustrating, because you're like, I could have made this such a better video. But sometimes I guess maybe that's the charm of it, that, it's funny how it works.
Terribly shot. There's only really one sort of camera angle through it. Early days of YouTube, we were chucking it together. We were actually headed over to Cobra Seats to sort something else with the Evora, and we picked this car up at the same time. We drove it home, and I remember going through a set of bends in the Lotus. Laurie was behind me in the MG, and I remember looking behind and seeing him basically stuck to the back of me, thinking, crikey, Laurie, we've only just picked this car up. We don't really know anything about it. And you're really going for it. And he held on. How he held on, I don't know, because when we eventually looked at it properly, this is a car, by the way, that had a clean MOT. It had 4 different brands of tyre on it. They were all shot to hell. The brakes weren't so great. One of the roll bars wasn't connected at one end. So functionally, I think, didn't have a rear anti-roll bar, maybe. And the interior did need a little bit of TLC. The gear lever appeared to have what I can only describe as jelly in it. It was like a metal gear lever with holes in it, but some sort of weird thing. I think maybe at some point it sort of had some fancy weird look about it, but now it just looked freakish. It was awful, but we kind of loved it. We drove it about. We both use it, and that was also how I broke my first phone screen.
Oh,
yeah. So the car the battery kept dying on it. We couldn't work out why. Eventually, we found out that it was because I think maybe one of the sensors had gone or something, but the light in the boot didn't go out, even when the boot was shut. Laurie only found this out because he took the car away to sleep in it overnight when he was doing some railway stuff.
As you do.
So had he not done that, we never would have known the cause. But one day, go out to use the car and it's dead. Completely, totally dead. Now, those are a bit old-fashioned, so you had a key, standard key, and you had your remote fob separately. So I tried to unlock it with the remote fob, not having it. That's okay, that's fine. Put the key in, pop the bonnet, put the battery charger on, sorted. Put the key in the door, went to turn it, no, not having it. Now, I don't know with these cars, but the new ZS that I've got, which is of similar vintage, has 2 pairs of keys, and each of them have got door and boot written on them. So I don't know whether this was actually a thing from the factory, or they just like to fail with alarming frequency. But
probably the latter.
Yeah. This car, we only had a key for the boot. So,
okay,
I had to clamber in via the boot, somehow work out a way to fold the rear seats down so I could then get through into the cabin to then be able to open the thing up to charge it. I was dragging myself through this aperture at the back, and I'm pulling myself through, and I'm laying on my side, and then I just hear a sickening...
Oof.
And I felt it as well. And you're like, oh no, come on. And the worst part was that phone, I think, cost more than the car.
Yeah, that happens. I told you, up until like a week ago, I could quite happily say I've never broken any of my expensive Apple products, any phone screens, things like that. But I managed to break my Apple Watch, and I've had to get a new one now. And it's not the screen I broke. What happened was I was in the kitchen doing some cooking, and I had a dressing gown on because my house is cold.
Yep.
And I went to stroke the dog, and I was doing that, but I thought, oh, actually, no, I'm going to put my Apple Watch back on now because I'm done cooking, done with all the dirty stuff. Go to pull it out of my jeans pocket, which is underneath kind of the dressing gown. And as I'm doing that, I get caught between the loop of the dressing gown and itself, and then it drops just from waist height to a brick floor, which is still a good amount because I'm 6'4", I'm a tall person. But then I look at it and think, oh, thank goodness, no, that didn't break. It was just a nasty sound. I put it back on. About an hour later, I was like, why is my wrist so itchy? And I took it off and I realised the bit underneath where all the sensors were, where it charged, everything like that, had completely smashed into oblivion. And I was just getting glass stabbing me in my wrist. And I'm like, oh no.
I remember one day on a film set, the sound guy turned up. And sound guys, as you all know, are always very conscious of exterior noise that you don't want on your recording and so on and so forth. And apologies to anybody that's heard the forklifts driving around outside today.
Yes.
We are doing what we can about it. It's still early days for us. But anyway, the sound guy turned up one day with a huge reel, sort of like hay bale size of fiberglass insulation.
Okay.
That he was holding with his bare hands.
Oh no, why would you do that?
I looked at him and I was like, is that glass fiber? And he's like, yeah, I got it for insulation. I was like, are you not wearing gloves? No. Like, your hand's not a bit itchy. Oh my word. I couldn't believe it. So I then developed a sort of love of cheaper, interesting cars because for a long time they were the only things that I could kind of buy and run. Because if I wanted to buy an expensive car, that meant selling an expensive car. I could not afford to buy a new expensive car for a very, very long time afterwards. So I had various different things. Before actually I started YouTube, honourable mention. I said earlier today I nearly bought a 306 GTI 6. I wanted a track car. I decided I wanted a track car, right? And
we've all been there.
Back then, they were all dirt cheap. Now, the car I should have bought was this lovely Peugeot 306 GTI 6, and all they had done is taken the interior out. 800 quid. But instead, because I'm a tool, because I didn't want a blooming old front-wheel drive French hatchback, I wanted a big meaty BMW. I bought an E36 325i that someone had stripped out, put the Warsteiner livery on, so it did look quite cool. And they had basically just they didn't really do much in terms of performance. They just taken stuff out of it, put some decent tires on, everything, and it came with a whole spare car.
Oh.
Yeah, and whole other 325i, right? Went down there with my friend to collect it. Got it. Went to the local pub like 5 minutes down the road. Locked it. Went in, had lunch, came out, wouldn't unlock. Messaged the bloke and said, here, I've just gone to lunch with the car. I've locked it and now it won't unlock. And he went, you've locked it? Oh, crikey. And I was like, what do you mean? He's like, oh, you're not meant to lock it. You didn't tell me this. It's a car. Of course I'm going to lock it. Like, if it's really important that it shouldn't be locked, do you not think you could have told me, don't lock it? So we eventually managed to coax it into unlocking, get about another 5-10 minutes down the road, and it overheats, boils over. So I wound up taking it back to him, leave it with him. I missed the track day that I've booked. Eventually, a couple of weeks later, I go back down there to retrieve the car, drive it home. I then proceed to do very little with it. I drove it a couple of times and I had to sell it because I wanted to go off to America to have a holiday with some family, and it was the only way I could afford it. So I sold the car. I took a bit of a loss on it. And then about 7 years later, somebody put a comment on my YouTube channel saying, oh, you sold me an E36 325i years ago and it kept overheating. Like, well, it didn't overheat on the 150-mile journey home. Like, it had an issue with an airlock in the radiator, but that got sorted. Like, you haven't mentioned this in the sort of 6 or 7 years since I sold it. And as it happens, it's an E36 325i. I was like, if you want to bring it back, I will refund you all of your money. Because again, I bought 2 E36s for 1,500 quid or something daft. Like, it was amazing. You could get these things. And of course, you didn't care about them. You just drove them around. You left them anywhere. Stuff happened to them. Like, it'd be a laugh. You have fun with your mates. I started getting into nice cars. And look, I love nice cars and everything, but there is a ritual with them. You know, you take them out, you drive them, you think about where you're going to park them. You know, you think about, is the space suitable or not? Like, what's the entrance ramp to this like? You know, I mean, in any Ferrari, I would not just casually go into a multi-story car park, because either the ramp's going to be too aggressive for stuff like the 550 or the 430, or it's going to be too narrow for stuff like the F12, which has got front lift, but is also a bit of a heifer of a car. These are things you just don't worry about when you're driving cheapy cars about.
Let's put it like this. You couldn't ever drive any of your Ferraris down to my unit.
No. The speed humps in here are like somebody's taken a pencil and just scaled it up. They're horrendous.
I know there's a guy who used to have a 355, and he would park it at the top of the driveway here, which is about a half-mile walk.
Yeah, it's fair way.
It's a fair way, because he didn't dare try to take it over the speed humps.
No. I think the Ferraris would get over them. The F12 definitely would, but I just wouldn't try.
No.
You know, and every now and again you do encounter a road where you just go, oh my goodness, what has happened here? As a friend of mine had similar speed humps at the back of his house. It's a very nice house. And I complained about them one day. I said, those blooming speed humps, I hate those. And he said, no, we put them in. I said, why did you put them in your car, guys? And he's like, it's the postman. Because the postman would just go absolute full pelt down this little driveway, and we told them to slow down, but they would not slow down. So in the end, we just had to put these really aggressive speed humps in. It's so frustrating. So currently in the fleet, you've got the Golf Estate.
Yes. I've got my Golf Estate, which is my 2002 Mark IV 1.9 TDI, and it's not a PD as everybody likes to think. It's one of the pre-PDs, so it's the more old school.
Oh, so you can run it on vegetable oil or whatever it is.
I can. Yeah. I was going to say that earlier. I used to run my Volkswagen Transporter on vegetable oil,
and obviously paid all the fuel duty on it.
Yeah, of course. Actually, no, there was a certain amount you could put in it per year.
Oh, you had an allowance.
You had an allowance. I can't remember. I think it was like 2,500 litres. It was something like that. The van only did like 1,500 miles a year, so it never did that. But I remember I used to drive to a place outside of Braintree to do rehearsals with the band I was with, and the drummer, and he'd always laugh when I turned up, because he'd just be laughing, go, I'm bloody hungry now because I want some chips. And especially afterwards, they'd pull away and they'd be like, it just smells like chips, and they'd always end up going to get a kebab or something after, and they always blamed it on me. So yeah, you know, there is that. So I've got my Golf, and I've got my Maestro, my 1990 Maestro, which is in storage, and I'm looking forward to pulling out of the barn at the end of February that it's in, and getting going on that again.
And that is because the last Maestro you had, which I drove,
yes,
that was the famous Apple 2000, sent over to Bulgaria as a complete knockdown, assembled for the Bulgarians who were at this point recovering from the yoke of communism, looked at it and went, look, mate, we've suffered enough.
Exactly.
Right? Like, we don't need this. And sent it back.
That is very true. But that one ended up, it had hidden rust, unfortunately. Well, I already had, because I don't know if you remember, when I had it.
Was it hidden in all the metal?
Yes, pretty much. It was underneath the floor and things, and it was too close to the suspension bits, and when I parked it up that winter before I got given this Maestro, I'd parked up and then got given the Maestro, the one I have now, a month later. I was thinking, what the hell do I do with this? I'm going to have to spend a lot of money. I only paid like 500 quid for the car, you know, and I'm only about maybe 800 quid into it. And I was like, yeah, I'll sell it for spares. I'll part it out, whatever. But yeah, it had rust on the arches, all the arches, and I covered them up with tape. That got through an MOT, believe it or not, because they weren't sharp, and it was literally taped up.
Yeah.
The headlining, as you put it, was on holiday.
Yes.
And the inside of it looked like a painter had done Do you know what? This is a family-friendly podcast. I can't say what it looked like a Jackson Pollock painting in there. It really did.
Yeah, because it was a painter decorator's car for a lot of its life.
It was mostly, and it wasn't that far. It was
and he
Cambridge
did treat it
based.
like a van.
Oh yeah, like I had no rear parcel shelf in there because all the bits had snapped at the back and stuff like that. And yeah,
It's fascinating because those cars, for anyone not familiar, you could buy a Maestro made in Bulgaria in 1996, brand new, I think as late as about 2004.
Yes, something like that. It was the early 2000s. It was the early 2000s. I mean, I never went. Here's the thing: people always call me the Maestro Man now and here. I never went out of my way to have.
Yeah,
a
you got to be
Maestro.
careful. You don't want to be the Maestro Man.
Exactly.
You don't want people suddenly turning up being like, "Oh, my granddad's passed away." So I talked in a previous episode about some adventures that my father, myself, and some of his friends went on, chiefly involving Reliant Robins. Right. Now, I learned a lot doing that. First of all, I learned how to not roll a Reliant. I've never rolled one. I'm happy to say that. I think if I drove one now, I probably would roll it because I try and be a bit more enthusiastic. I learned why you don't want to drive one unless you absolutely have to, because, 60 is about their limit, A long-distance cruiser, they are not.
No.
I also learned that a great number of what people call Robins are not Robins at all. So most of what we were buying was Rialtos, which is a kind of 1980s variant. But the other thing about Reliance, so for those unaware, it's the classic three-wheeler as seen in things like Only Fools and Horses and Mr. Bean. Now, due to a quirk of UK law, I was talking earlier about how I would love there to be a category of car for young people and so on. Well, there was a similar thing with the Reliant, because the Reliant classified as a tricycle or motorcycle, basically because of what it was. But you know what it was that actually meant it qualified as a motorcycle?
Was it the engine size?
It was not that. It was partly the fact it's a three-wheeler, but it's also the weight of it. They're only 450 kilos.
Oh, wow.
That's lighter than a Caterham. So there's nothing to them, nothing at all. In fact, they had to get a sticker made up, so they measured the windscreen. The windscreen is 3 feet from side to side. Right, it's tiny, this thing.
We were sitting in my Golf earlier on the way here because I'd picked you up en route today, and we were like shoulder to shoulder, elbow to elbow in that.
Yeah, no, you're very now. Luckily, there's no sort of side impact protection or anything else. Like a cyclist with a bit of a tailwind would probably cut a Rialto clean in half, and they probably wouldn't know what had happened, right? But here's the thing, okay? Here's the thing about Reliance, which I don't know whether it's the same now, but when we were buying them sort of 15 years ago, a lot of them had been owned for a long time by old boys that just used them to go to the shops and back. And these were old boys that never got a car license.
Yeah.
So it was their car, it was granddad's car, whatever. You can see the grandkids being like, no, please don't make me go out with him in that. Please, my street cred will be instantly destroyed forevermore. But the thing is, we were almost never buying these cars off granddad. We were almost always buying these cars off granddad's son, because granddad had died. One of them, as we were handing over the cash, because it was 15 years ago, so you bought 400 good cars for cash, he said, thank you very much. That's what we need to get his headstone made up.
It's not funny, but it is because
No, it's tragic.
oh god, that poor family.
I mean, I tell you what, it's a hell of a negotiation tactic, isn't it? If you tell someone you're selling something to get granddad's headstone made up,
You're going to go up and you're going, okay, you can have the full asking price.
So this is a complete tangent, right? We've recently had to get a headstone modified because somebody's passed away and they've gone into the same plot as granddad, right? So it's a normal thing. So the headstone gets sent away and you wait a little bit and it's weird and it's awkward. And then eventually someone gets in touch with you and is like, right, okay, so what do you want? scribed onto this thing, and we'll make sure it matches the font of everything else. Because you can't have one person buried in Times New Roman and someone else buried in Comic Sans, can you? It'll look a bit amateur. So, and we get the phone call, right, here's what we want put on it. And they say, okay. And they come back to us and say, no, you can't have that put on there. Why not? It's too long. It's too many characters. Really? They're like, yeah, it's too big. You're not going to have space on there. Oh, okay. Right, all right. That's a bit... Are you sure? And I sort of said... I was speaking to Mum about it. And I said, no, this is not right. We don't... It's not like we're putting, a whole poem on there or anything. It's just like, plus Nan, basically. And eventually it transpired they were looking at the wrong headstone. And I thought, aren't we lucky we didn't just put, and Nan, or something like that on it, which is actually what she wanted us to do, but we weren't allowed to. Because then they would have just inscribed it on somebody else's headstone.
Oh, God. You would have got that back and been like, gone to a grave and been like, hang on, where is the and Nan bit? And you would have looked next door and you'd go, oh, bloody hell, there's Gerald and Nan. Who's Gerald?
Who's Gerald? Like, what did she not tell us? Who is this strange man? And of course, poor old Gerald's family are going to be like, hang on a minute, who's this person he's shacked up with didn't tell us about, till he's dead. It kills me. So we've got another episode to record this afternoon, but ahead of these sessions, because we record these in pairs because we're sneaky and cheeky like that, and it just makes life easier, I put out a post on YouTube. Sorry, not on YouTube. I put a post out on Instagram. Look at me knowing the difference between social medias. Asking people to give us some quick fire questions. So why don't we quick fire a few of these questions?
Okay.
And we can answer. Okay, here's one. This is from TJW. Do you think Volvo is underrated in terms of making cars that are fun to drive relative to their competition? I don't think that they are, because, to be honest, I forget the last time I drove a Volvo that I think was actually fun to drive. I think maybe the C30.
Yeah, I love a C30 because it was based on a Ford Focus platform, wasn't it? And that was a good platform, so probably that.
Here we go. From Jay Softly, the car you would buy for 1,500 quid, an actual listing, not a hypothetical one. And I've got some more paperwork here that I haven't gone through.
Let me start one.
Yes, please do.
It's up a little bit more, but I'm sure I
can negotiate.
I can negotiate. Yeah. It's a Mitsuoka Vuit. Do you know what that is? You know what that bad boy is? It is basically
like a 1960s Jaguar.
Yeah, it's a Nissan Micra with a Jag front end and rear end on it. That's my answer. Up on Auto Trader right now, 1,875, but they take a deal. You just know it.
Yeah, I don't think you need to rush to make that phone call. I don't think that's going to fly off the forecourt anytime soon. Okay, there you go. All right, biggest design fail by a manufacturer when they changed their design language, i.e. the big BMW grills, etc. What do you think?
Do you have a sneaking suspicion it's going to be Jaguar soon?
Well, yeah, because they've just chucked everything in the bin, haven't they?
Yes.
So that could be a possible design fail, though we haven't seen the final product there yet. So I don't really want to render judgment.
I would say, I suppose it wasn't really. Was it really a failure? The Ford stealing the Aston Martin grille? I don't know. Certainly when that came out, I didn't like that. I was not a fan of that.
Oh, do you know what really annoyed me about that? Is that for a period of, I think, about 2 years, I kept thinking I'd seen an Aston Martin Signet, when in actual fact it was just a Fiesta or something.
Yeah. A Signet, what a car! That's so funny.
A Signet.
That's a story for another day, I think.
Yeah. Do you know what? Actually, I think a big failure in design language is when Aston chucked out all the design language of the year 2000s V8 era cars and went for their new language, because they're just not pretty anymore.
No.
I don't think. Okay, so here we go. Got another one here. The funniest car quirk that I've seen when reviewing a car. I have had some cars do some really strange stuff. My friend's Skoda that he got for free, that had a whole bunch of... It wouldn't stop when you took the key out, right? So he took it to the local auto electricians to diagnose it, and they said, "Look, mate, this is going to be quite a while because someone's gone in here and they've done something stupid with the wiring loom." And he's like, "Well, how long is it going to be to fix it?" They said, "Oh, could be about 10 hours of work." And well, how much is it? It's like £75 an hour. So he's like, like you're like, when the car's free, you know, that tells you how much the rest of it's worth. So you're like, so he said, "Tell you what, can you do 250 quid's worth of fixes to it? Because I'm happy to pay that, but any more than that, really, not worth it." So they got it so that it would stop when you took the key out. It would lock and everything else, but it did completely reset all the timer, everything. Whenever you turned it on, it was like someone had pulled the CMOS battery, you know, it just didn't know what time, date was, anything else. But it also, whenever you put it into reverse, put the aircon on full blast. So, yeah, so there was that one. Well, here's one for you. Your favourite type of car event?
Absolutely. I can tell you what my least favourite car event type is.
This is from C5 Wagon. They just give them some credit.
This is my least favourite car event is the one where people hang around in Halford's car park, revving the engines of the life of them and doing donuts and skids. That still happens, believe it or not. I still see it.
It does exist, especially in Essex.
I know. Favourite type of car event? Do you know what? I've quite enjoyed the stuff that I've helped you put on, the little things at the little pub. It's just nice. I'm not really a big car meet person, but something like that where it's a little bit more
manageable,
intimate.
Few dozen people.
Yeah.
No, it's nice that. Okay, and here you go. I'll give you one last one, then we'll wrap up ahead of part 2. What do you think of the Nissan Cube?
Love it.
I love the Nissan Cube.
I love the Nissan Cube. Well, we didn't we say there was something like that in the one where we talked about the Fast and the Furious films, about the cars we haven't, and I couldn't believe that we both liked the whole
that. I think I might have to start each of these recordings with like a community notice section, because I have made edits to some of the first podcasts that we've done, because we've all managed to make a couple of howlingly awful mistakes.
Okay.
Which is what happens when you do stuff off the cuff and you don't have the internet to double check. But we did say, at least in the original recording, that the Hulk car from Tokyo Drift was a cube. It is not. It is not. It's a VW Touran.
Oh, it is, isn't it?
Yeah.
Oh, no. Oh, we got that so wrong.
It's still cool.
Oh, absolutely.
As is the Nissan Cube.
Yes, absolutely.
Because you know what? In this day and age of interchangeable, you know, faceless crossover, whatever things, anything that's a little bit different and interesting, I just automatically like it because it tries.
Yes.
And the Cube for me tries, and therefore I've got time for it.
Yeah, no, absolutely. Absolutely. No, I do like the Cube, and I do like a Touran as well.
Yeah, not bad. So anyway, that is enough for today. We would both like to thank you for joining us. And if you haven't already, please make sure that you subscribe to the podcast, however you want to view or listen to it. Any and all feedback that you have for us, we've got email addresses in the description of, again, wherever you listen to us. We really appreciate every piece of feedback that is given to us, because we would like for this to be able to go on for quite some time, and to do the best job of that we can, we need your help. But for now, all that remains to be said is a thank you, and we will either see you or you'll hear us on the next one. I got to work on our outro. We got to work on our sign off. Let's workshop that over lunch.
Let's do that. Let's do that. All right.
Bye.
Bye. Oh, Christ. Oh, God.